Pick anyone. Doesn't matter who. He wakes up at 6:30, commutes 40 minutes, works 9 to 5, sometimes later, maxes out his 401k match, pays his mortgage on time, has a decent credit score, keeps an emergency fund, does everything a responsible adult is supposed to do. And yet, 20 years later, he's not rich, not poor, not struggling exactly, just stuck. Comfortable maybe, never wealthy. Here's the interesting part. The question isn't what he did wrong. The question is whether anyone ever told him what the actual game was. Because the system that teaches you to be financially responsible is not the same system that makes people rich. And that's not a conspiracy theory. It's math. Cold, simple, uncomfortable math. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Why does this matter right now, more than it did 30 years ago? Because for the first time, an entire generation is doing everything right and still falling behind. Between 2010 and 2024, median household income in the US rose by roughly 55 to 60%. Sounds fine, right? In that same window, home prices in most major metros more than doubled. The S&P 500 grew over 300%. College tuition outpaced inflation year after year. Asset prices didn't just beat wage growth, they lapped it. That means if your income is rising, but not at the rate assets are rising, you're not standing still. You're falling behind. Slowly enough that it doesn't feel like falling. It feels like normal life getting a little tighter every year. And that feeling, the one where nothing is technically a crisis, but nothing ever quite adds up. Because it's easy to explain away. It's much harder to admit it's structural. How the system actually works. Let's break this down simply. In any modern economy, there are really two categories of people. The first group earns money from labor. A salary, wages, a professional fee. You trade time for money. The second group earns money from capital. Stocks, real estate, equity, ownership. Their money works without them clocking in. The middle class lives almost entirely in the first group. And that's the first structural problem, because income is taxed the hardest. A salary gets taxed as ordinary income straight off the top, at the highest marginal rates most people will ever pay. Capital gains, on the other hand, the money made from owning assets, is taxed at a lower rate, and often deferred entirely until you decide to sell. So a surgeon earning $300,000 a year through actual labor pays a higher effective tax rate than an investor whose portfolio quietly gained $300,000 sitting in the market. Same dollar amount, very different tax treatment. This isn't a loophole nobody noticed. It's the design. Second part, or access to compounding. Wealthy people have something the middle class almost never has. Surplus capital they don't need to touch immediately. If your entire paycheck is already spoken for, rent or mortgage, car payment, groceries, childcare, whatever's left over goes into a 401k or an index fund. Good. Necessary. But the base is small, and compounding on a small base, even at a great rate, takes decades to look impressive. Warren Buffett made over 99% of his net worth after age 50, not because he suddenly got smarter, because compounding needs two things, time and scale, and the middle class typically starts late on both. Late because debt and expenses come first. Small because there's rarely much left to invest with. The hidden mechanism. Now here's the part most financial advisors will never say out loud. Inflation isn't just prices going up. It's a quiet transfer of wealth. Think about how new money actually enters the economy. The Federal Reserve, or any central bank, expands the money supply. Stimulus, quantitative easing, rate cuts that make borrowing cheap. New money gets created. Who touches that money first? Banks, large corporations, asset holders. And what do they do with it? They buy assets, stocks, real estate, businesses. prices for those assets rise first, before anyone else even notices the new money exists. Only later does that money trickle down into wages and everyday spending. By the time it reaches a paycheck, asset prices have already moved. So whoever arrives late to the party always pays more for the exact same thing early arrivers bought cheap. The middle class is almost always late because their money comes from income, and income is the last thing in the chain to react to new money entering the system. So when it feels like everything just costs more now, what's actually happening is your purchasing power is being quietly redistributed toward the people who already own assets. Not through theft, through timing built directly into how the monetary system works. Hype versus reality. Now let's put the hype next to the reality. The hype? Just invest consistently, get 8 to 10% a year, and you'll retire a millionaire. The reality? The math is technically correct, but it hides one huge assumption that your income stays stable enough to invest consistently for 30 years straight, with no job loss, no medical bill, no life event that forces you to dip into savings, and no lifestyle creep along the way. But that's not how real life works. As middle-class income rises, lifestyle tends to expand right alongside it. A bigger house, a newer car, better schools for the kids. None of that is irrational. It's human. But it means the surplus that was supposed to compound gets absorbed into consumption instead. Wealthy households tend to think in the opposite order. Acquire the asset first. Let the lifestyle upgrade come from what the asset produces. The middle-class pattern usually runs backwards. The lifestyle upgrades first, and whatever's left over gets invested. It sounds like a small difference. Over 20 or 30 years, it's the entire difference between staying comfortable and actually building wealth. And here's an uncomfortable truth the personal finance industry rarely says out loud. Most of the financial freedom content flooding your feed was built by people who are already asset-rich or who are selling you a course. Their incentive is to convince you the system is fair, and all you need is more discipline. Because if you started questioning whether the structure itself is tilted, you'd stop buying what they're selling. Zooming out, the bigger picture. Now zoom out further. This isn't just one person's problem. It's a pattern that has repeated consistently across nearly every developed economy for the last 40 to 50 years. The US, the UK, Australia, France, it doesn't matter which one. As economies grow, wealth concentrates further toward those who already hold assets. The middle class's economic role becomes, functionally, the consumption engine. They earn, they spend, they save a little. And that spending is exactly what funds the growth of the corporations and asset holders above them. Here's the irony. The more responsibly the middle class spends its disposable income, the more it unintentionally fuels the growth of wealth above it. Every phone upgrade, every car lease, every subscription, that money becomes revenue for companies, which becomes profit for shareholders, which gets reinvested into more assets. And the long-term risk is this. As automation and AI keep advancing, the value of labor-based income keeps shrinking relative to asset ownership. The gap that already exists between income and capital isn't likely to close on its own. It's more likely to widen. And if an entire generation keeps believing the system is fair, you just need more discipline. That generation never gets around to asking whether the structure itself needs to change. Closing, the lingering question. So back to that person we started with. He's doing everything he was told to do. Saving, investing, staying disciplined. And he still may never reach rich, not because he lacks effort, but because he's playing by the rules of a game that was built primarily for capital, while he's only ever competing with labor.